Greetings and welcome to the basement. In this video, I am going to create an extremely simple scene in Unity, and I am going to narrate everything. Every little click and key press. Why? What is the intent? Well, this video is for the people that have never used Unity before. If you are already familiar with the editor and you feel reasonably comfortable adding things to the scene, manipulating them, using the inspector, basic material creation, things like that, you're going to get very limited use out of this video. This is really intended for the people that don't know much at all about Unity. And the reason why I'm going to be narrating everything is I know I have personally found it frustrating when I'm watching a tutorial video on YouTube and all of a sudden the person does a sequence of 2 or 3 things, just like, bam, really super fast. It's like, whoa, 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 what did you do there? Why did you do it? Was that just a habit of yours? Is that something you've already covered? It's like, what did you just do? And so my goal here is to not invoke that feeling. And so I am going to narrate every key press, every action as best I can. You've been warned. Let's get going. Like I said, I want to have a very basic scene here. I want to have some ground, air quotes. Some nice grassy ground, couple of brick walls, and some crates and barrels. Because according to the video game contract, you have to have crates or barrels, or your membership in the Game Developers Club is going to be revoked. You have to have crates and barrels, right? Right. It's just, everybody knows that. So there's some assets that I am using here, and they are free. I already have them imported in. The goal of this video is not to show how to use the asset store to import things in. I assume that you already know that. The assets that I am using are the use free ground materials, that nice luscious grass, use free architectural materials for my brick, not pictured here, and wooden assets 2.0 for the crate and barrel. And of course, I pointed opposite, or my mouse, said the opposite of what my mouse cursor is at, because of course. Now, if you're signed into the web page, you'll just be able to add them in straight through the web. I'll have the links down in the description of the video. Or, of course, you can come over to Unity, go into the asset store, search for them in the search bar right here, and add them in that way. Now, I do not like to work in the sample scene. So I am going to create a new scene. Control N will get you a new scene. You can also go to File and New Scene. First thing I'm going to want to work on is my ground. I am going to right-click in the hierarchy area here, go to 3D Object, mouse over and hover for a moment, and then left-click on Cube, and that's going to create a cube. Now, where this cube creates is initially going to be one of the great mysteries of life. It's not that mysterious, although it is fairly random because there's no way you can actually tell where it's going to create. And the answer is it's creating at the editor camera's focal point. So the camera that's looking into the scene here has a focal point. That is where the objects are being created. If I scroll my camera back, so in the scene view here, I'm going to right-click just to make sure that I'm in the scene. Of course, that allows me to look around a little bit. And I'm going to use the scroll wheel to scroll my camera back. My focal point is still here. So if I right-click, drag to move my camera over, my view over a little bit, and this time I'll go to Game Object, 3D Object, Cube. Now look at that. It created the object. Even though my camera's further away now, it created it over there. Whereas the first time I did it, it created it right in my face. Again, that is the difference between the focal points. If I zoom in on one of these cubes, which you can do either by double-clicking or my usual preferred method, did a little right-click wiggle there just to make sure I was in the scene view. I will do that a lot, by the way, and that is something I am going to stop narrating. If you see my mouse cursor come over here and the screen gives a little bit of a wiggle, I am right-clicking on the scene view just to make sure that that is where my focus is. So focus on the scene view. I'm going to press F, which will focus in on the object. Right-click, drag to move my camera. In hierarchy, right-click, 3D object cube. It's back in my face again. That's the secret behind it. It's the focal point of your editor camera. Now, where exactly that darn focal point is anybody's guess at any given time. So yeah, good luck predicting where it's going to create things. Now, I do not actually need all of these cubes here. And I'm going to use WASD to navigate back a little bit. I don't actually need these cubes right here. So I am going to left click on cube 1, press delete, left click on cube 2, press delete. Now I'm back to just this cube right here. I don't actually want this cube at this position, however, so I'm going to want to reset that. But before I reset that, I just want to go over exactly what transform is, because that is an important concept to understand when it comes to development in Unity or really any game engine, because they are all going to have this transform concept. Even if it's not named exactly transform, this identical concept is going to be there. And your transform is what controls your position, orientation, and size in three-dimensional space. So position, I have X, Y, Z. I'm going to press W to make sure that I'm on the translate widget, or you could also click up here. I tend to use a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So as a reminder from my editor video, W for move, E for rotate, R for scale, and T for the 2D rectangular tool. So pressing W to go back here. As you can see, as I move the blue Z, the Z number changes, red X, the X number changes, and Y, the Y number changes. These panels here are for dragging in a plane. So if I want to drag in the XZ plane or the ground plane, I can click on this spot right here, drag, and now it's going in that plane. It's a little bit difficult to see right now because we don't have a frame of reference. Likewise, if I go to rotation and I start rotating around the red X, blue Z, and green Y, you can see how those numbers change. Likewise, scale, pressing the R, I mishit the T key there. Pressing the R key to get into scale, I can scale it on independently of any of the axes, including a negative scale, which basically reverses the object. And unless you have a very specific reason for doing that, and there are specific reasons for doing that, don't do a negative scale. You generally don't want to do that. Now that I have a completely horribly abused cube, I could either delete it and restart, or I can just simply reset the transform. This is a very common operation that you will be doing, resetting the transform. Every component, these are all components, every component in Unity is going to have these three little dots next to it that you can click on, and it will have, they will all have, roughly speaking, this set of operations. This specific set of operations will vary depending on the component. What I want to do is reset, which will reset the component back to its defaults. What size do I want this ground? Well, I want to have this be a 25 meter by 25 meter ground. So I left clicked in the box, typed in 25, left click in the box, type in 25. I can then either click out somewhere or hit the enter key to finish entering in the number. A common beginner mistake, and heck, I still make this mistake from time to time, is to enter in the number and then go, okay, well, I want to move this, so I'm going to press the W for the translate tool, and Nothing's happening. Whoop, and I just accidentally hit the 3 in my frantic keyboard mashing. Backspace. It's because I'm still in here, so I need to either hit enter to get out of entering in that number, click out, do something. Now, I refer to this as meters. Strictly speaking, this would be a 25 by 25 unity unit area. I know this because the default cube that you create is a 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit cube. Now, how Unity is set up by default with the physics engine, 1 Unity unit is equivalent to a meter. So if you think of everything in terms of meters when you're dealing with position and size values in Unity, as long as the default physics values have been left alone, you're pretty much not wrong. Unity units can be thought of as meters with default settings. So this is a 25 meter by 25 meter surface area, and it is 1 meter thick. Another thing that I'm going to do while I'm thinking of it is I want to rename this cube. So I'm going to left click on the cube in my hierarchy. I could also just simply, select it here, but I like renaming over here. So I'm going to select it over here in the hierarchy. I'm going to hit F2, which is the basic Windows key for rename. And now I can type in a new name, which I'm going to type in as floor, and then hit enter. You can also, in the inspector, come over here and you can type here as well. So click, arrow, backspace that out, enter. I've started to get some work done in my scene, so I'm going to save it to make sure I don't lose any work. This is a complicated engine. It can crash. This is not a rock-stable piece of software. It's mostly stable, but it will crash on you, and it will crash on you in the worst possible time. So I want to save this to make sure that I'm not going to be losing any work. Not that this particular example is anything to cry about. I am going to do Control S for save. You could also go to File and select Save that way. Again, I generally find it a lot faster to use keyboard shortcuts. Since this is a new scene, pardon me, it's going to immediately prompt me for a file name. Now I'm going to save this in the scenes folder. So I'm going to double click on this, and I am going to call this demo. Left click in the file name area, type in demo, left click again, get rid of that pop-up box there, and I'm going to click on save. Ignore this folder here, is from earlier experiments. No, and apparently I can't ignore this folder. You will not have this folder here. Ignore this. This is a goof. I didn't just do that. There we go. Now it is saved. The disadvantage of doing all my videos in one take. I've got my scene saved now, so if Unity crashes, I at least have a recovery point. I want this to be grass. Now, I imported in some ground textures. I can see the folder right here, Ground Textures Pack. So I'm going to double-click on that, double-click on grass. Now, I have several different things here. Now, first of all, your view probably doesn't look like this. In fact, your view probably looks more something like this. There's a little slider down right here that if you left click and drag on it, allows you to choose the size of your icons, or if you drag it all the way to the left, puts it into sort of a list mode with very tiny icons. So you can choose between, do you want to see things in a list, or do you want to see things in a grid of icons? Your choice. I generally tend to work with things in a detail list mode like this. but that is purely personal preference. Now, there is a material in here. I can see it. There's also a texture and a normal map. A quick word on textures. It's a word you've probably heard if you have been even slightly involved in gaming for any period of time. In fact, you've probably downloaded a mod called a texture pack for a game. They're incredibly prevalent in Minecraft. You'll hear us talk about skins and texture packs and for a variety of games. The terminology's a little bit misused. In most, not all, but in most modern games, a texture or a straight up image file like this right here isn't what's applied to objects. Instead, it's what's called a material. And a material is a combination of the texture file and a shader which provides additional processing information. It's like a little micro program. And so it is a material that I need to apply to this 3D object. And there is one here. I recognize it by the icon. That is the icon in Unity for a material. And if I left click on this and I go to look at it in the inspector, there is a slight problem with this material. Legacy shaders. It's not that the legacy shaders are bad. It's that they don't necessarily play nice if you mix them in with non-legacy shaders in the same scene. That can cause some very odd graphical issues. Not always, just that it can. So if you see something with a legacy shader, you either want to recreate the material or change the shader that's being used. For the purpose of this video, I want to recreate the material because it also gives me the chance to show off a couple of other features. So I'm going to go back to my assets folder here, and by left clicking on this folder, and now I'm going to create a material. Again, I prefer the right click method rather than coming up here and using this menu. You will almost never see me come up here and use these menu options. I will practically always right click in the appropriate areas. Or if I'm in a game object, I'll use add component to add a component in. Almost never will I come up here to use these. Purely personal preference. There's nothing special about me doing it the way I do. Left click back down here to deselect. Okay, so I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to create. And these are what I like to call the Unity primitives. They're the assets that come hard baked into the game engine. You always have these assets. And generally speaking, these are the only ones that you can create in this fashion. Specifically, I'm looking for material, which is right there. Left click to select it. It's going to create a new material, and I'm going to call this grass space mat. There's nothing magical to putting the word mat or material in a material. It's just a habit that I like to do. It gives me a little bit of a visual reference as I'm scanning through large lists. In addition to the icon grass mat. Oh, okay, that's a material. Over here in the inspector, making sure, of course, that I have the grass mat selected. The two settings in here that I care about modifying at the moment are the albedo and the normal. Albedo is just a fancy word for saying the texture map. If you mouse over it, you'll see the tooltip, albedo, RGB, and transparency A. It's an RGBA format. And there's a little dot right here. And if you click on that, pretty much anywhere in Unity that you see this little dot, by the way, this is called the picker. So I can click on the dot to pull up a picker, and it is context sensitive. It is only going to show me the things that fit what this property is looking for. It's looking for a texture. It's only going to show me textures. It's like, okay, yep, see here, I want a grass, see here, GR. Oh, no. None of those are the grasses that I was looking for. Of course, I'm deliberately doing this little goof here. If you were paying attention while we were in that folder earlier, yeah, actually it called everything diffuse. Now notice this is a bit of a regular expression. This is returning bricks gray diffuse, as well as all these things that are just called diffuse. This is an unfortunate aspect of some asset packages in that they are not well named. Why he decided to name all of the grounds diffuse, I don't know. At least for the albedo, it's easy to figure out. This is the grass that I want. It looks nice and luscious, so I'm going to choose this grass. I can either left click on it once and then close the menu, or what I typically do is I'll double click and that will select it. Now you see it's filled into the albedo. Now I want this to have a little bit of additional texture, so I want to assign a normal map, which basically fakes three-dimensional detail on an object. So I'm going to select the picker, and I just happen to remember that everything's called normal, so I'll type in normal, and oh goodness gracious, how am I supposed to figure this out? This is a mess. I mean, I think it's this one, but I'm not sure. Okay, so how do I figure this out? It's like I mean, really, there's nothing else to say about it. Well, I could try to figure out, where this is. So, okay, let's see here. Ground texture packs. I'm going to double click on the and where inspector. Why did you deselect? This can be an annoying aspect of Unity where I want to drag something into this slot right here, because that's the other way I can add information here, so I can drag it in. But anytime I click off of it, it deselects. Now I could try to carefully navigate over here. You notice it's not deselecting here. But there's, all it takes is one misclick and I deselect this and I have to go hunting back for it. There's a trick we can use. On the inspector, there is a little lock icon. Clicking on that locks this inspector window. Remember, you can have many of these inspector windows open. But this locks this specific inspector window to whatever is currently selected. So now it doesn't matter, and I'm just left clicking a bunch. Doesn't matter what I click on at this moment. The inspector's like, yeah, no, I'm locked. I'm just going to always show this. Now, the other great mystery I have is where exactly is this albedo? If I go into the ground textures pack, there's like grass and dead leaves, grass and rocks, 6 different grasses. It's like in ground 1 and ground 2. It's like, I don't know. I'm not going to play a guessing game here. Instead, and this works for any selectable asset property in the inspector, I am going to just do a single left click on the item in question. I'm going to left click, not on the picker, but on this little tiny preview. It's going to jump me straight to where that asset is located, and it's going to ping it. Again, pay attention to the word diffuse there. I left click here, and it pings it there and moves the project view to that specific spot. This is an excellent way of finding where your resources are. Now I can left click drag the normal over into my normal map to add a little bit of extra detail to this. Now that I'm done with that, I'm going to want to remember to unlock my inspector. Otherwise, I won't be able to see things. Going back to assets, I now have my grass material made. Now I can drag it, left click drag, onto my floor here. I can also drag it into the hierarchy, but in that case, I don't get the preview. Here I get the preview. Here I don't, but it still works. Either way, it's perfectly fine. Now, from a distance, I'm going to right-click and use WSAW to back up here, just holding down S. From a distance, this looks okay-ish. But if I zoom in on this, left-click F, focus in on it, and then I'm going to use, holding down the right mouse button, use WSAW to zoom in, If I fly down to, like, say, right about here, which is where I actually want my view camera to be. Ew. That's ugly. I don't want that. And actually, before I get on to fixing this, I'm going to fix my camera. So I'm going to left click on my main camera to select it. Now I want this camera's view to match my current scene view. And the easiest way to do that is Control-Shift-F, because that will snap whatever game object you currently have selected to the scene camera's view. You can see here now my camera preview is mirroring that. And if I left click on the game tab to switch over there, sure enough, that's what I'm seeing. You can also go to Game Object and Align with View. That works as well. Keyboard shortcut is better, in my opinion. Yeah, that's kind of ugly. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to left click to select my grass material again. And I'm going to use tiling. Tiling says, actually, let me right click, WASD my way back out so I can see more of this. Tiling refers to how many times does this image repeat within the given area it's being applied to. Now I can change this without changing the tiling by changing the UV mapping on the object, which is utterly beyond the scope of this course. UV mapping, models and meshes, that is the job of the animation team, of the art team. That's a modeler and texture artist job. And we are not even touching that with a 10-foot pole. So what I do have to do is I have to change the tiling in this case. And if I change this, it's a little bit harder to see with this image than it is perhaps with some of the others. But if I change my tiling to 2 and 2, left click and just entering in the numbers, hit enter to clear that out, you can sort of see a little bit of the seams there. This isn't the best of, flawless images, but it's repeated. And if I increase this now to 4x4, it's now repeated even more. And I could change it to 44x44, and now we're getting kind of silly. I can get up nice and close, and yeah, it looks really smooth now, almost too smooth. You can actually see how it's really repeated. This material is not designed to be used like that. And so an actual sensible number in this case is going to be 8. I've already played around with that. So again, just left click, enter in the numbers, hit enter. And there we go. I have reasonable looking grass. I've done some work. I'm going to hit Control S to save. And now I'm ready to put in my brick walls. Again, I am just going to use a cube and scale it. Now this does have some issues. Switching back to the scene with the left click. If I look at the edge of my ground here, oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. That does not look good. I ask you, does it matter? Do I see it here? I do not. Game devs do this all the time. Smoke and mirrors is one of your most powerful tools when designing games. It doesn't have to be correct. It just has to look correct from the perspective of the player. And if you happen to be one of my students, correct according to the assignment requirements. That's does have to be correct in that aspect. But seriously, smoke and mirrors. I don't care that this edge is crazy messed up because I don't see it. What the player sees at the end of the day, that is what truly matters. Walls. That's where we were. And not the invisible kind. Nobody likes invisible walls. They're so useful, though. They get a bad rap. They really do. They're so useful. All right, I have a cube that has decided for who knows what reason to be right there. That's fine. It can stay there for a moment. I need to change its size anyways. I want this wall to be 10 meters long. And let's make it 3 meters. Oops, nope, not 3 meters thick. 1 meter thick is quite high. 3 meters high. So again, just left clicking, typing in the numbers, and hitting enter to clear it out. Now, yeah, I've got this wall like way over there for who knows why. I want to get it, not only do I want to get it over back up on top of the ground, but I want it exactly on the ground. I'm going to hit the W key. I'm going to drag it up, and I guess, we can drag it over. Okay, so it's a little bit embedded. Now, if I try to manually place this, it is going to be a massive pain to manually place this. I mean, I can try to drag it up, and now it's floating a little bit. And yeah, never leave game objects floating, because your players are going to find it, and they are going to point, and they are going to laugh. Now, I could try just slightly embedding it. I mean, this is a trick that's used by game developers all the time, is to slightly, or in some cases deeply, embed items. Open up Skyrim in the editor, and you will see this a lot, to basically reuse assets or create certain looks and feels. But I want this to be exactly on the surface of the ground. And this gets to one of the more powerful position manipulation tools that you have, which is snap to contact. This only works if at least one of the items in question has a collider on it. So in this case, this cube, my wall, has a box collider, and my floor, which also was a cube, still is, has a box collider. So I can use this trick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control-Shift, and when I hit Control-Shift, notice that I get a little box right here. If I left-click drag within this box, it will snap to contact. Now, if you are on default project settings, ignore that click. If you are on default project settings, this here most likely says pivot. And if this says pivot, and this is a Unity cube, and you hold Control-Shift and you snap to contact, it does that. Because Unity primitives are special. In order for it to not do that, you have to come up here and change your mode from pivot to center, which isn't going to have any visual difference because the pivot and the center of the cube, the Unity default cubes, are exactly the same. But for some reason, it has to be in center mode if you want to use snap to contact in a sane and sensible fashion. Now, depending on your orientation, I'm going to actually left-click on this first and move this over here a bit. Depending on your orientation, you might have some jet black shadows that you are looking at. Depends on how you moved around in the scene before you started plonking down the walls. The temporary way of getting rid of the shadow, and we'll deal with the permanent way in a moment, but the temporary way is in the scene editor, turn off scene lighting, and basically this turns on sort of a fake preview lighting model. This is not how the scene actually looks, but it does most of the time make it a lot easier to do your editing. Dotting around with the right mouse button held down. Now I'm going to start speeding things up a little bit because a lot of the actions that I'm going to be doing, I've pretty much already done. I'm going to create another material, bricks, and apply it to this wall. So right-click, create material. I'm going to call this brick mat. Oh, hello, caps lock. You are on. Not that it really matters, but it bothers me. Hit the enter to get that name change in. Albedo, click on the picker. I'm going to choose the bricks rough red. Double click, picker. This time the normal map's sanely named. Excuse me. Double click, select it. Left click, drag the material onto the wall, release. Looks fine as is. I am not going to modify the tiling. I'm going to left click on the cube, F2, and I'm going to call this wall. Enter. And let's position this back a little bit. So left click on the plane there. Now I want this to be a corner. Now I could go through and recreate this, or I could just duplicate it. Control D is the shortcut for duplicate. which will duplicate said item exactly on top of the original. So now I have a wall parentheses 1. So I'm going to use the X-Translate widget to move it out. There it is. Now, like I said, I want this to be a corner, so I need to rotate this. I could press the E key and use the rotate tool to try and do this, but again, attempting to eyeball this, not happening. Now, I could press and hold Control, which will cause this to snap by default in 5-degree increments. So I could rotate it to 90 degrees that way. Or I could just simply come over here, since I know this needs to be rotated 90 degrees, just type in 90 and hit enter. Now I face another problem here. I want this to be a perfect corner. But again, eyeballing this is not going to be fun. What I definitely don't want to do is I don't want to embed them together like that. You see that flickering right there? That is Z-fighting. That is bad. That will instantly draw your player's attention. You don't want it, unless, of course, you know for 100% fact that the player's never going to see it. But I want this to form a perfect corner. How can I do that? This leads to the second most powerful tool in terms of placing three-dimensional objects, and that is vertex snapping. If I press and hold the V key, I'm going to get this little white square again, and depending on exactly where my mouse happens to be, the widget may or may not jump. What it's doing is it's jumping to the nearest vertex or the nearest point on the model. If I then left-click drag, it will snap that vertex to the nearest other vertex that it can find. So if I snap them like this, oh, hey, look, I have a perfect corner now. I come over here and look at my game window. There we go. There's my beautiful little wall. Although it is a little bit short, I can still see that ugly spot there where the skybox meets the horizon. So I'm going to grab this one, Control-D, duplicate. I'm going to, again, use vertex snap to place it. I'm going to left-click to select that one, Control-D to duplicate, press and hold V, and vertex snap it out. And now I have a nice complete brick wall that hides that horizon joint there. Finally, and I bet you're going, oh, please, finally. I know this video is getting a little bit long in the tooth. Let's put down our crates and barrels. So I'm going to left double click to go into my crate folder or wooden crate, double click again. Now, which of these one do I use? Well, this is the model. I can tell from the icon, but if you can't see the icons, you can tell by the fact that it has this little arrow here. Only models are going to have this little expander arrow here, which you can left click on to expand or collapse. The thing next to it doesn't have that arrow. It's the prefab. Again, I can tell in this view because this is the symbol for prefab. So I'm going to drag in a crate. You know what? I'll drag in another crate, and I'll drag in another crate. And notice as I'm dragging them in, it is automatically snapping them to contact with whatever it is I am dragging them onto. So if I want a crate on a wall, I can have a crate on a wall. Let's see here. I want to have some barrels too. I'm going to put a barrel on a crate because I'm a little bit of a rebel. So I'm going to drag that in. Hello? Barrel? Okay, fine, whatever. I'll do snap to contact. So I'll drag the barrel in, Control-Shift, left-click drag, barrel. Okay, you're working fine on the wall. So why won't you stack? Well, remember that comment I made earlier? At least one of the objects has to have a collider. Box collider. No collider. And no collider. Just a mesh renderer. These are effectively visual fluff. They don't actually exist as far as physics are concerned. So there is nothing to snap to contact to when I try to do Control-Shift or when I drag them in. But it works with the wall and the floor because they have colliders. One final thing, and then we are truly done with our simple little scene. and that is to deal with any rogue lighting that you might have. Again, depending on your orientation, you might be looking at a corner that looks like this, just jet black shadows. We need to recalculate lighting. Down here in the lower right, you will see this line saying auto generate lighting off. If you click on that, left click, it will pop up the lighting window. You can also find that window by going to Window, Rendering, Lighting Settings. It's generally a good idea to have this docked, so I'm going to left click drag until it docks right here. I usually keep this window docked here on the hierarchy. I'm going to ignore all the options right now, and I am just going to click on Generate Lighting. Depending on the scene, this can be really fast, or this can take several minutes, or it can take literally hours. It will be some time before your scenes get complex enough to reach the hour stage. But as you can see, regenerating the lighting completely fixed my weird, bizarre, super black shadows. And now my scene looks a lot better. And if I go to the game window, I have crates, I have barrels. That's good enough for a video game scene. Now that I am done, I'm going to Control S to save again, to save this brilliant work of art so that all may enjoy it. And there we go. That is an excessively narrated example of building a very simple scene in Unity. If by some miracle I have not driven you to madness yet, a like on the video would be appreciated. But if you have been driven insane, well, the dislike is perfectly understandable. Until next time.